Welcome. Thank you everyone so much for being here. I'm Amelia Gottwald from the Department of Teacher Education. And before we get to the main event, I have two announcements. The first is that this Friday, March 8th, there is a Generative AI 101 workshop here in Create. So if you're interested in that, please, you can find out some more information and we can talk to Sue after that. And secondly, there's an international visiting scholar, Lori Kolomets from the University of Turku in Estonia, and they will be here next Tuesday on the 12th. So please put that on your calendar if you are able. But the reason that you all are here is for our Create Seminar Series talk by Dr. Natale King. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction and then turn this over to her. So Dr. Natale King is an associate professor of science education at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. Her scholarly work focuses on advancing Black girls in STEM education, community-based STEM programs, and the role of curriculum in fostering equity in science teaching and learning. Dr. King is a recipient of the 2023 National Science Foundation Alan T. Waterman Award, the nation's highest honor for early career scientists and engineers, and she was the first educator to receive this recognition. Dr. King is also an NSF Early Career Award recipient whose research challenges the capitalist agenda for encouraging girls' involvement in STEM. She elevates the identities and brilliance of Black girls in her scholarship programs and grant projects. In addition, Dr. King serves as the principal investigator of the NSF NOISE project, seeking to diversify the STEM teaching workforce. She is the founder and executive director of IM STEM LLC and partners with community-based organizations to provide Black and brown children with access to comprehensive academic summer enrichment programs that embrace their cultural experiences while also preparing them to become productive and critically conscious citizens. So please help me to welcome Dr. King to Create.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Oh, y'all can do better than that. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in Michigan. I came with 2 coats, right back home because apparently I brought the heat with me as well. But it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. Let's see if I can get this. And to those online, thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining. Okay, so I had a pleasure to meet with a few special people here. So Dr. Krajcik, thank you for saying yes and approving for this visit. Of course, Amelia, Dr. Godwalls, Dr. Schwartz I was able to meet yesterday. Dr. Stephanie Marshall picked me up, and Dr. Burgess I had the opportunity to speak with today, as well as Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown. Thank you all for making time to meet with me and to speak with me. And to our doctoral students, our scholars, I was able to meet with Kate, Jonathan, Grace, Lindsay, and Ting Ting. It was a pleasure to be able to learn more about their scholarly work. And always behind the scenes, you have Sue Carpenter, who was just helping, and I'm sorry, you just started helping me. I would have added your name on there, and everyone else who came together to make this day a success, and this time with you a success. Thank you. I always enjoy sharing about just the people, behind the work, and so I don't do this alone. At Georgia State University, I have postdoctoral research associates, as well as graduate students, undergraduate students, project manager. We have teams, and that's why we're able to accomplish this work. So I'll share a little bit about our work today. So what that looks like, I said I was deleting slides, and so if I go over time, I'll just touch on a few things, and then if you want to be able to learn about anything else, we'll open it up for Q&A. Here are just some of the partners that we have that help to support some of the scholarship. So I'll start with science education because that's where my degree is in curriculum instruction within science education. And so our current framework is around like 3 dimensions within science teaching and learning. And so according to the National Research Council, What we're trying to do is we're trying to help children to realize a vision for education in the sciences and engineering, where students over multiple years of schooling, they can actively engage in scientific and engineering practices, apply cross-cutting concepts to deepen their understanding of the core ideas in these fields. So we call that three-dimensional, teaching and learning. And so here are the disciplinary core ideas around life science, physical science, earth-space science, and engineering and technology. And it's like three-pronged. And so around 2013 was when NGSS was published. We have some states that have adopted it, or other states that said they didn't adopt it, but they kind of adopted it. Adjacent states like Georgia. And so we have those core ideas. And so what we saw is that the standards moved away from just the content, and they want to say, okay, what do scientists and engineers do? And then how can you make connections across these different disciplines, the life sciences, the physical sciences, through those cross-cutting concepts. And so you always can start with some sort of an authentic phenomena or problems, and then they're connecting between amongst the three. What we're also able to see is that even in some of the other disciplines, such as ELA, English Language Arts, mathematics, your social sciences, a lot of these practices they are expected to do as well. They should engage in argumentation from evidence. Their standards start with obtain, evaluate, and communicate information. And so I see that we are a lot more similar than we are different. Even looking at our cross-cutting concepts, we have 7 of them with patterns and looking at causality, cause and effect relationships. You could talk about rise and falls of government, for example. It doesn't just stick within the sciences and connecting the science disciplines. And so while all of this is fantastic, and I feel like it's moving toward an inquiry-based approach to science teaching and learning, it's not enough. We're still seeing some of the same results. And so we are connected to the what and the doing, but we're not necessarily connected to the multidimensional who. Like, who do we see as engaged in science? Who do we perceive as scientific and mathematical talent? And what about the why? Why should they be engaged in this work? Why should they even care? And so all of our standards is still grounded in a Eurocentric approach to doing science. The why does not resonate with most children, especially as our nation is becoming more black and brown. So what I would like to say is the starting block is where we need to go back. We have to go back to the basics, go back to the beginning. So starting blocks are used in track and field, particularly by sprint athletes, to brace their feet so they do not slip after the starter's piston. But when I was in high school, I actually ran track and field. My race, I did the 110 hurdles. I used to do the 4x1 relay. I was a sprinter. I also did the 200. And so I vividly remember one day grades were released. And when grades were released, half of our team did not qualify to run. So what that meant was the other half had to run additional races. So many of them were disqualified. They were ineligible until they can bring their grades up. So I'm a sprinter, but now I had to run the 400. Anybody know the 400 is one lap around? I mean, I've done, half a lap. What's another half, right? So, it was on this particular day, it was very, very hot. And so I was doing well. I bent the curve, and I was running. About 3/4 way down, I collapsed. And I skidded my shoulders. I still have the scar on my shoulder to this day. I was not trained or prepared to be able to do the full lap. But yet, in this blazing heat, I'm giving everything that I have for the team. And I failed. I black out, I wake up, and I'm on the pavement. I was disqualified also because not only did I fall, I did not finish the race, and I also went into another runner's lane. Fast forward, I qualified for districts with the 110 hurdles. And so when I'm preparing for districts, I'm fine. I have like 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to have your rhythm for the hurdles. So I'm in the starting blocks, and we're ready to go. The pistol went off, and I hesitated. I did a false start, but I hesitated. And once I started off on the wrong foot, it disrupted my rhythm. My form was off. My trailing leg was going to catch the hurdle behind me, and it's just downhill from there. So I backed up, and I decided that I was going to try to start again. Like, just go back to the starting line and just start again. And in that moment, I had to decide whether it was more important for me to finish, knowing that I did not necessarily have the stamina to get over those hurdles and to clear them. I was probably going to take each one down as I went through. Or, even worse, I would probably end up on the pavement like I was before. And I just knew at this point I wasn't going to be able to recover. All of the hurdles that I had to go through reminded me of the time when I had that, collapse, and I was doing that 400. I wanted to take the nice long strides. I wasn't in a position to do that. So after assessing the situation, I walked off the track. It was more important to clinch that ounce of dignity that I had left than to be back on the pavement and to, knock over the hurdles. To me, I feel like that never left me. I mean, I'm far removed from it now. But as a Black girl in STEM, I face similarly many hurdles, many situations that literally knocked me off my feet, had me plastered on the pavement. So what do you do in the blazing heat of oppression, exclusion, all the isms? You're forced to run and to compete in a race that you were not adequately prepared for. I still wear the scar of defeat each and every day, but was I the problem for stepping up and failing? What about choosing, to walk away because of the fear of failure? While I'm far removed again from this situation, it still resonates with me, or more so, it still haunts me to this day. Why did I jump? Why did I do that false start? Why didn't I finish? Why did I decide to walk off the track? Did I fail, or did the system fail me? So it makes me think of, are we doing enough? And then for what purpose, for whom, and what is our starting point? If we think about our curriculum, it's based on Eurocentric ideas. And so what's happening is that we're saying it needs to be culturally relevant. It needs to be culturally sensitive and culturally responsive, but we're still just piling on top of Eurocentric ideas. And what I'm proposing is that we just get back to the basics. And I'm talking specifically for Black and brown children, where they're able to have a new route, a new starting point, a starting point that epistemologically and ontologically is in congruence with how they view and how they approach and see the world. So I can think a little bit about even fugitive pedagogy, because a lot of times, even in the United States, we have this unidimensional way of approaching and looking at things and about the history of African Americans starting from slavery and enslavement. But again, we have to challenge the epistemological underpinnings of education. So Carter G. Woodson's, Dr. Gibbons, he kind of builds on Carter G. Woodson's work about the miseducation of the Negro. And he says that basically it's this whole notion of imitation and mimicry. It emerged through anti-Blackness in American schools. And so what we're doing is implanting hegemonic white ideology and curriculum, and students begin to internalize these racialized myths and conceptual knowledge, but we can't necessarily imagine life beyond Jim Crow. So what does it look like for us to have a different starting point? Also, schooling and the vision of ideals has alienated Black people from their own realities through indoctrination and assimilation. So essentially what we're doing is we're trying to equip students to begin life as a European white man. So fugitivity is not about resistance or agency, it's about activity, not achievement, because there's always a possible threat of recapture. So what does that look like for you to operate within this space of fugitivity? Well, for one, we have to dispel some myths about Black and brown children being incapable, that they're deprived of culture, that poverty is causing learning problems. They need to be in special education and not decide that they're gifted, but of course they might have ADD or ADHD or something's wrong with the children. And that this myth that school treatments and resources are equitable, stemming from Plessy versus Ferguson. So if we look at the state of African education, and this is borrowing from Dr. Joyce King, she says transforming education for and about people of African ancestry in order to go beyond inclusion into a burning house, as James Baldwin once put it, is a formidable task. To attack the roots of our miseducation, cultural annihilation, and economic subordination, we must undo the entrenched system of thought that has justified our predicament. And so if we think about Asante and what does Afrocentricity look like, it's literally a paradigm shift. A philosophical paradigm used to generate theories and methods of analysis and correctives to the social, economic, and cultural conditions of African people. And what I love is this notion that Africans and African Americans must be at the center of their own narratives. What does that look like for us to share our own stories and tell our own narratives? So I'll share a little bit about who I am and the person, the regular person behind the scholarship. I'm a mom, I go home, and these boys, they give me so much joy, but they keep me very, very busy, especially that little one, Ace. So they're all Ace, Angelo, and Antonio. So everyone knows about the scholarship around Black girls, yes, but at home, I'm the queen. That's when we got the Allen T. Boardman Award, and I made sure that they came with me. I wanted them to experience, so that's the whole family, and that's my husband, Tony. So I grew up, my parents are from Jamaica. They hail from the beautiful island of Jamaica. That's my mom and my dad, and there's 5 of us. And what's interesting is that my parents always said, you know, they never told us what we had to become, but that they wanted to make sure that we were going to contribute positively to society. And so where life took us, Nicole's in the middle. She's the oldest, and she is OBGYN in the Metro Atlanta area. You know, I'm a professor. Then Natasha, here with the clipboard, she is an attorney. My sister Nadine, she works for Microsoft Minecraft, and my brother is a civil and environmental engineer. And so everyone always asks, like, how were they able to do it? And honestly, it was just through love and through community programs. It was like we were poor enough to get no help, if that makes sense. Like we were in a 2-parent household. My mom was a teacher, my dad's a correctional officer. Barely made ends meet, but they always tried to find like programs within the community or places where they can put us for us to get enrichment and us to get support that would not cost much money. So it's always been like an education focus. They valued education even though they necessarily couldn't afford anything but like our public schools. For my sister Nadine, she ended up getting in a fight in middle school. She got kicked out, she got expelled during middle school. And of course during that time, it's like, okay, do you turn your back on your child? No. My mom ended up homeschooling her. You know, she was working during the day, but she would come home and leave work for her. Homeschooled her, and then a few years ago, before she left, you know, into industry, she was the teacher of the year, a middle school. She was a middle school math teacher, became teacher of the year. So it's just funny how life comes full circle. You have these regular, normal kids in your classroom. You never know who they're going to become and how you should nurture them. This is me, and I was a high school teacher, biology and chemistry teacher, and so my students, it was important for me to work within the community that I felt gave so much to me. I went to the University of Florida, and I wanted to work in East Gainesville, where many Black and brown children resided. And at that point, I wasn't trained to be an educator. I was trained within the sciences, but that was my way of giving back. And I thought that's where my journey was going to end in terms of it. It was almost like my own makeshift Teach for America, if that makes sense. I was going to teach for like 3 or 4 years, and then I was going to go to medical school. Well, while I was teaching, I got introduced to like IEPs and 504 plans, and I'm like, what is this? Like, why am I attending these meetings, and what does it mean for me to really serve them in my classroom? And so I decided to do a master's in special education, and while I was in that program, I took took an inquiry-based science course with Dr. Rose Pringle. And I put together my portfolio, I gave it to her, she graded it, she asked if I was gonna come can I come one day after work, and we will discuss it. So I went to UF, and she said, Natalie, what's next? And I was like, well, I'm studying for the MCATs, I'm applying to medical school. And she said, you should really consider a degree in science education, a PhD in science education. And when she said that, before I knew it, I said, a what? And she said, a PhD in science education. I never really thought about the professors and what degrees they had and how did they get to where they were. I was just one track focused on, medical school. And so she told me what the process was. She said, instead of the MCAT, you'll be doing the GRE, and she walked me through, and I've been loving this journey ever since. But it took someone like her to be able to identify the scientist within me and to see in me what I could not see in myself. And so here I was, I transitioned to do my PhD, and I still wanted to remain connected to the community. And so I partnered with my local church, and I started doing, I love to do dissections, so that's part of that section there. But then even looking 2 years ago, this is on campus, and things just come full circle, that's owl pellet. But just trying to figure out, I'm in the community, but yet I'm in a space where I can also bring girls onto college campus. And so it's what does this mean for me in dealing with the complexities of identity? And so I had to learn and unlearn, some things. You don't have to be uptight, you don't have to be socially awkward, you don't have to be an old white man to be a scientist or a science education researcher. You can be energetic, you can be beautiful, you can be an extrovert, you can be young, gifted, and black. And so this is when I received the Alan T. Waterman Award, and that's the director of the National Science Foundation. And so just thinking about what does this look like for us to disrupt narratives, and what does this look like for us to tell our own stories. Starting within the faith-based community, my local church is where I did programs, and so that's where I Am STEM, which is the community-based program for which I serve as founder and executive director. Let me see if I can get this to play. Oh, that's cool. Okay, I don't know where this is, but this is all. It's somewhere drifted to the side and I can't find it. Oh, there it is, okay. Okay, so just a little bit about the journey and just how things have grown. I shared that I started off as a high school teacher, and then I was doing work with the University of Florida College of Medicine, and for 10 years I did their Introduction to Health Professions course to get more in rural areas engaged in STEM and medicine. And then here's Caring and Sharing Learning School and some of the other sites that are in Gainesville who partner with the programs, including some of the Freedom Schools. And then we reach some of the outskirts, and so this is a rural area in Stark. And once I moved to Georgia, then we started doing programming here and started doing some single gender programs as well, working with Girls Inc. and as well as the school, and then we also work with the Boys and Girls Clubs. And again, some faith-based institutions. In Lawton, Oklahoma, we now have 3 current sites. This year we'll have 5. And so the city has really gotten behind getting more of their children engaged in STEM and working with those who are already youth-serving organizations to be able to do the work. And that's in Texas as well as in Tennessee with some of our additional Freedom Schools, and in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And some of their schools there. So that just kind of gives a little glimpse into what this looks like, some of that work. Let me see if I can get to the next slide. So I'll share just about the program, curriculum, social emotional development, and try to pull it all together for you. So our goal is to kind of meet students where they are, and I talked about the 3 dimensions of science, teaching, and learning, but our goal is to start with who they are and what they're interested in, and then we can figure out how to build curriculum from there. Again, a different starting point. And so if you're familiar with Wakanda Forever, this is Shuri, and so this is just a few of some of the activities that they would have done. So we focus on community, bringing community STEM, social justice together and partnering with community-based organizations to do the work. I want to share a little bit in terms of curriculum and what this looks like to enact maybe more of an Afrocentric approach to curriculum. And so we made DNA bracelets and even created some of our own heart-shaped herbs. And we introduced them to decoding through Wakandan language and kind of built from there. What was unique and interesting is that they learned that the Egyptians were the first people to calculate the 365-day calendar and also to use the sundial to calculate time. They also realized that our planet revolves around the central star, which is the sun. So it actually, those developments and contributions came from Africa. If we think about the Dogon civilization, the Dogon people out of Mali in West Africa, they were educated in the field of astronomy. And so this civilization based many of their traditional ceremonies on space events. You're able to see that thousands of years ago, they had knowledge of Saturn having hundreds of rings, Jupiter having numerous moons. They even knew about the spiral structure of the Milky Way. They were very intricate knowledge on Sirius star system, which to this day can only be detected with powerful telescopes. If we even think about hieroglyphics, the hieroglyphics numeral system, the ancient Egyptians used these symbols to account for numbers. They had symbols that represented up to 1 million. And if you think about the right triangle, if I wanted to calculate this, what would I use to calculate, let's say, the hypotenuse? What would I need to use?
Pythagorean theorem.
Yes, Pythagorean theorem. So what you need to know is that Greek scholar Pythagoras actually was educated by Africans. He spent time in ancient Egypt for 23 years to learn how to do that, and it's named after him. Okay? He took the theory of triples that they had been doing for years and rebranded it as the Pythagorean theorem, creating a numeric equation for what the Egyptians had been doing for centuries before him. And so in terms of understanding where our roots and where we come from, they have to be able to see that they're beyond just African Americans, but if they go to Afrocentric approach, there are contributions that they will never learn about in our formal school curriculum. If we're even thinking about hair, they did hair porosity tests, what makes hair curl, because human hair has keratin in it, and there's 3 different types of ponds that maintain that hair structure. You talk about the disulfide bonds, the salt bonds, the hydrogen bonds. And so even coming here this morning, I told Dr. Brown, I was like, well, I'm starting off with curls, but if it continues to rain, I'm gonna have an afro by the time we're ready for this talk. And so how does that work? How does hair maintain that moisture? How does it absorb through the pores? Like, we talk through those things. And so when they're learning about the science, they're learning about it in a way that's relevant to their everyday lives, who they are, their contributions. So it might look like this with a hair porosity test. Then we'll take them to like a field trip that can connect this all together. So this is called the Black Hair Experience in Atlanta. And for them to have, to love themselves, to see that black hair is art. Then if you start thinking about curriculum, like some resources, Unearthing Joy or Cultivating Genius, and or both, have been very instrumental in terms of having this historically responsive approach to teaching and learning. We still use the social justice standards, and then having them look through like what is diversity and justice, and what does that look like for us to have action. And then Bettina Love does beautiful work around abolitionist teaching and the pursuit of educational freedom. And so we utilize that. And there's also the Black Liberatory K through 12 science education, BLACSI, and that is with Monica Miles, Rihanna Roby, Terrell Morton, Nicholas Ortiz. And they talk about the beauty and creativity of Black youth, naming their positions and ideas as forms of scientific knowledge and inquiry, while disrupting existing mainstream paradigms and practices within science education. So these are just a few of curricular resources. If you're thinking about like STEM curriculum, we don't just focus on the sciences, we don't just focus on math and engineering. We also think about how can they just become better people? Like, what does this look like for us to deal with the emotions that they come with? So we have SED curriculum that we create, and we try to connect it back to whatever the theme might be. So for this one, it was about responsibility. doing what you're supposed to do and accepting the positive or negative outcome of your actions. And so Shuri was now responsible of being the new Black Panther. What does that look like? What does that mean? Can you name a time when you had to be responsible? And it just opens up conversations for us to discuss, that they can develop social awareness, relationship skills, self-management, and other competencies. And so we do have an article that we published around culturally sustaining pedagogies and looking at social emotional development, including 21st century workforce, life, and non-cognitive skills, and how our youth were able to manage emotions and achieve goals, show empathy, and develop healthy relationships within the context of our programs. And so how do you get from transitioning this from service to what we would deem as community engaged scholarship? What does that look like? So one, we just have to approach it not just from an Afrocentric lens, but also where we're not having a deficit lens as we're looking at communities. So what is the wealth that exists within communities? I know that 22% of households within the 32641 area code where I first got my start operate off of $10,000 a year. Okay, so maybe the economics and the financial piece is not there, but there are so many other resources that we can tap into, that we can lean into. Somehow they're making it, and so what are they doing, and how can we learn from that? And so it's kind of like moving toward this very open way of thinking about, broader way of thinking about what it looks like to embrace culture. So I'm just going to give an example in terms of navigational capital, and this means like skills of maneuvering through social institutions. And so what are some things that we put in place or that we were able to tap into while there was that this mentorship to navigate barriers that prevent entry into STEM careers, or early and deliberate exposure to STEM careers and foundational knowledge to generate that interest into those careers, or giving them opportunities to interact with mentors, STEM professionals, faculty, as well as instructors, and also looking at the effectiveness of and access to professional development for instructors as well as for parents. And so these, we can begin to name and outline specific actions that we either took or that we were able to leverage once within communities to have a much broader and rich sense of the wealth that exists there. So this is Ms. Lloyd. Ms. Lloyd started with me back in maybe 2012 or 2013. She's a parent. Her son Patrick has attended our programs since he was like 4 years old. And she's a teacher, but most of all, she's a community member. And one year, Miss Lloyd said, Miss Natalie, I want to do dance with the kids. I can connect math with dance. We'll do ballroom dancing. We'll do line dancing. We'll do stepping. And can I have permission to do that? I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's try it. And from there, she ended up taking it beyond just the program, where she began to get the community engaged in dance. But now she's getting the community engaged in dance as a fundraiser to support STEM education. And so they'll pay, I don't know, $65. They'll participate in this weekend-long event called Teach Me to Dance fundraiser. And they literally learn the dances. They learn line dances, ballroom dances, primarily line dances and stepping. And she brings in people from across the dance community from across the US, and they're able to teach it. And last year, when Ms. Lloyd did it, you can see even some of the sponsors that she's been able to secure over the years. Again, this just started out off as an idea, but she was able to raise $20,000 that went to one of the STEM camps there. She still teaches at the STEM camp. These are probably some of her scholars there. That's Ms. Lloyd, and that's the principal of the school. And so how do you become more agentic? How do you leverage what you have in order to make a difference? I know when I first started off these programs, a lot of my time was spent trying to convince parents that this mattered. I don't spend time doing that anymore. They convince themselves. All they want me to do, I'm seeing emails. When is registration open? I thought it was going to open on March 1st. So holding me accountable and our team accountable to get things done. And so it's fantastic to see this in terms of access to STEM. We wrote an article that showed determinants of Black families' access to community-based STEM programming. And what we were able to see is that the students and the children that we were designed to serve is exactly who we were serving, because we went and we were across the street from the housing authority. And while we were there were people who were coming from the other side of town who were coming to our program because even though they had access to what you would call better programs on that side of town, they were like, no, I want my children to be able to learn this type of curriculum. So even those that were middle class or upper class were bringing their children there. We were able to provide it pretty much free for the children from across the street. They were paying, and so it basically gave us like a funding model, a sustainability plan for us to continue our programming. But we did a late class analysis, and they just said with the location that increased access, as well as the curriculum promoted educational and economic inclusion. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more about that. So our Black girls. Advancing Black girls in STEM education. So we're partnering and doing like a research practice partnership approach, which is basically, we have this problem of practice. So I meet with like Girls Inc. or Ivy Prep Academy, and it's all around providing access to STEM education. We're committed long term. It's a mutualistic relationship, and we generate original analyses. And so we have cohorts of middle school girls, as well as high school girls, and I'm really trying to do a longitudinal study to see how are they developing STEM identities over time, and then what aspects and what constructs do we want to be able to focus on in thinking about STEM identity. It stemmed from some of the work around Black Girls Speak STEM and some of the counter stories that I started with my dissertation work, looking at the informal space and how they made sense of the formal learning experiences based on what they were doing in this informal space. We were able to see that this is the original framework in terms of my train of thought, was that there was so much literature around what was happening with Black girls in formal schools. And what I wanted to do was tease that out because they spend most of their time outside of school to see what does this look like within the context of an informal STEM program. They are co-researchers in the process, and how could we look at some indicators such as race, gender, and class, and how those play a role within their perceived identity and across learning context. That's how I was perceiving it. This has developed a little bit more since then. So definitely an intersectional approach to this work because Black girls have positive academic disposition towards science, yet they're not engaged with the content most times. There's subjective beliefs held by students and teachers that critically influence their persistence along the math pipeline. And they're often rendered invisible in mathematics, and so there's a need to create this positive socio-epistemic spaces to increase their visibility. So on becoming, do you all recognize any of these people? Who? Michelle Obama, okay. That was the one I gave you. Who else do you recognize, or maybe not? Okay, so next to Michelle Obama, that is Dr. Barbara Williams. She was the first woman to receive a PhD in astronomy. Under Michelle is Dr. Jadida Isler, and she's an astrophysicist who was the first to earn a PhD in astrophysics from Yale University. And then we have Dr. Jamie Valentine, who was the first African American to receive a PhD in physics from Johns Hopkins University. And so what does it mean to be the first? And there's always untold stories of struggle, of resistance, and resilience. But what I tend to see also is that there's this burden of advocacy work to strengthen the pipeline. And so we have to be repositioned to be able to elevate the voices and expertise of Black women and girls. So what does this repositioning look like? And I talk about it in 3 ways. One is just noticing. That's the first thing. Look beyond at-risk factors to that community cultural wealth. Stand in solidarity with Black women and girls to fight against injustices, as well as cultivate inclusive and welcoming learning and work spaces. It should be validation. Black girls and women, they're whole beings with full, multi-dimensional identities. There should be a period there, okay? That's full stop. So before we see them as objects that need to be changed, we need to recognize that they come to us whole, and they come to us with full multidimensional identities. So as we create these counter spaces, they should have access to resources, services, and refuge from discrimination and trauma. And we should get beyond just coping in and navigating toxic cultures to a greater vision of being and becoming. Eventually, we don't want to have to create these counter spaces. Eventually, we'll hope that this is just the way that things are, that when they get into these spaces that they can belong, that they can see themselves in it. But it's going to take a few of us to be the first to make way for those who are coming behind us. And in terms of validation, listening to them. So one of our scholars said people of color have made many things with science that helps us today. I feel it's unfair that people of color are getting excluded from the acknowledgement that white people get all the time. And another scholar said, my grandma's job is me. She always has a meal for me, always has the things I need and the things I want. She has the greatest and hardest job of all, being my mom. She raised me and saw me break down and rise over. And thinking about that familial capital, everyone may not come from a two-parent household. It may be, Big Mama who is the one taking care of them. And we should be able to acknowledge and validate that. That's who she sees as mom. And we should embrace that. Make sure that she knows what's going on. For this particular situation, she doesn't have necessarily transportation. And so we ensure that either, train tickets, bus tickets, whatever is needed for her to get Ubers, to get from point A to point B so that she is able to participate. Because that's how grandmother or her mom would want to see happen. And then also looking at humanity. Make sure that it's humanizing. And in this age of artificial intelligence, AR, VR, all of it, what does it mean to be fully human? Well, at the center of humanity is love. And so how are we cultivating relationships? How are we protecting spaces where Black women and girls experience joy and intellectual freedom and promotes positive self-identity and development? Food is one way. And so this is just us having our own international potluck. And so they were able to bring some of their favorite foods that their families create. And this gave us an opportunity not only to talk about their favorite foods, but also like the origin story of it. Like, where are you from? What country are you from? How do they make it? And there was this whole debate about jollof rice and which country makes it better. And so we had Nigerian fried rice, we had jollof rice, we had all sorts of things. And then we also looked at our names, the pronunciation of our names, and making sure that they were valued, that they were heard, that we were pronouncing their names right. And then we also asked them, how did you get your names? And some of them didn't know. And they asked their family members, well, who named me? How do I get it? And so we were able to share even some of those stories, and then using our 3D printer, to be able to create like keychains from their names and putting them together. And so there's all sorts of interesting ways that we can do this. But essentially, me in the academy, I don't necessarily see myself just as an expert of Black girls and Black girls in STEM, but more of a conduit in that I'm not afraid to pass the mic and to elevate their voices in this work. So that's a proverb that the one who tells the stories rules the world. What does it look like from Afrocentric perspective for us to pass the mic, to allow them to tell their own stories, for us to get out into the community and listen to them, they are the experts, and to elevate their voices and experiences within our work. In passing the mic, I asked them to just use, give me 10 words to describe yourself. Okay, now take those 10 words and boil it down to 5. And then what is it, the one word to describe yourself, right? And so we see that some of the ones that are most prevalent were smart, talented, caring, passionate, helpful, loving. These are not the words that I was reading about Black girls in the literature within science and STEM education, which is what really inspired me to do this work. And then also, we have to be willing to live in the messiness. And so we asked them to even draw, what does it mean for them to be a Black girl? And you could see that there was like these juxtapositions. It's like perfect, not perfect, strong, wounded. What does it mean to be able to operate and to live within the messiness? We try to clean things up too quickly. And so they don't leave their identities when they walk out of their homes. They bring them into every learning environment. So how do we create spaces where these multiple identities and perspectives are valued and acknowledged? So I'll just end quickly here about diversifying the STEM teacher workforce and what that looks like in the work, and that's with the Noise Grant. And I just put together just 2 slides about this, but I have to share more. And so we have developing the STEM teaching workforce, where we recruited STEM professionals to become teachers. And we want them to teach within what NSF calls the high need schools, but we teach them in the schools where students deserve them the most. And so here are some of our teaching fellows. We have cohort 1 that is about to finish their 5-year commitment in next month. And then cohort 2 will finish next year, but they're not finished. A lot of them will, I believe, will remain either in the classroom or in the district. And so this is one article that we wrote. We were really trying to understand in terms of teacher preparation, and they were recruited and prepared during the COVID times when everything was virtual. And so we just had to restructure our programs, restructure the way that we did things. And so what did it mean for us to emancipate STEM education, utilizing abolitionist teaching through the virtual environment? And so we created these virtual micro-teaching experiences as well, where they had direct access to children. And it was a different way of getting in the community, although everyone was at home, and then leveraging community cultural wealth. So if you're interested in learning more about that, there's the article. I will say one thing in terms of abolitionist teaching, and I'll share Nate, who is one of our teachers, what he said. He said, an abolitionist teacher is someone who does not take no for an answer, doesn't take silence for an answer, and navigates what negatively impacts the students. If it's not equitable, there's a problem. If there are distinct differences in how these students get treated versus how those students are getting treated, then there's a problem. Anything that destroys our students is a problem. While it's not my fault, it is my responsibility to fix it. It is my job as an abolitionist teacher to make sure that they don't experience inequities and that they have a fair opportunity. This includes fighting systemic barriers and systemic oppression. We also, during our signature experiences, we don't necessarily have them on campus. So we take them out into the community and we partner, collaborate with those entities in order to offer a day where they learn about, for example, Zoo Atlanta, what they have to offer to students, what they have to offer to teachers, and then we also have our own PD. They're able to take a tour of the zoo. We've done it at the Botanical Gardens, the aquarium. We even partnered with BlackRock, which is an investment company. They learned about financial literacy, not just for things that they can teach their students, but for their own benefit. Like, what should we be doing as, you know, in our 20s, 30s, and 40s to make sure that we set up a better future for our own families. And Megan Narain is one of our teaching fellows, and as a result of the program and what she learned, she created Culturally Relevant Science, which is crsci.org. It's a nonprofit dedicated to creating innovative, affordable, and inclusive STEM education for all students. And so they have videos and all types of lessons that don't cost a lot of money that can help students to be able to learn STEM concepts. So in terms of a call to action, what does this look like? So I'm hoping that this talk was really trying to urge us to think through a collective disruption of an agenda that perpetuates the marginalization of Black and brown children within the STEM learning spaces and beyond. Pervasive negative stereotypes and unwelcoming cultures within our STEM disciplines demand this intentional intervention and a unified commitment to dismantling these exclusionary systems. So I'm hoping that we can recognize the scientific and mathematical talents of Black and brown children, that we can create more spaces where they belong, that we can move the hurdles out of the way so that they can succeed, and that we're not afraid to disrupt and have a new starting point, looking at those starting blocks for a paradigm shift. And with that, I have Sankofa, which means that you must reach back to reclaim that which is lost in order to move forward. So we don't have to come up with anything new, because the blueprint has already been written. And so this metaphorical symbol is used by the Akan people in Ghana, and it's depicted as a bird with its head turned backward, taking an egg from its back. It expresses the importance of reaching back to knowledge gained in the past and bringing it into the present in order to make positive progress. And so I'm hoping that we will be charged to be able to do that today. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen. me accept questions. Hi.
Thank you for your talk. So I teach intro-bio here, so in the university level, and I was wondering, what can I do with my students in my classroom, right? So everything is so Eurocentric, right? The intro-bio curriculum. But I can do whatever I want, because that's one of the things we get at the university level, right? That's not at the K-12 level. I can teach whatever.
Theoretically, unless you're in Florida.
That is true. That is true. I'm here in Michigan. Yeah. So, what should I read? What should I do? What would you say?
So what is very interesting about your question is that I gave a talk, and it was in North Carolina, and the talk was about how can we have more of an Afro-futuristic approach to undergraduate biology. There's a whole group that's doing that work under Dr. Terrell Morton. And so what I will do is I will connect you with Dr. Terrell Morton, because they literally had a think tank to look at some of the concepts that are taught in undergraduate biology and how they can have a different approach to it and put together some resources. So I'll make sure to make that connection to you.
Yeah. No. Thank you.
Thanks. So many of the interventions you've described are in the informal space, right? Because the informal space gives us so many more rich affordances to be able to kind of engage folks. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you bridge the informal space stuff to the formal school-based stuff, and kind of what the experience is that way?
You know what's interesting is that I started off as a formal school teacher. So I knew the standards and the curriculum, but now I had another space where I could operate outside of it. But I wanted to make sure that they weren't just doing it for fun. That by the time they walked away, they knew exactly, from a conceptual perspective, what they learned, and they could apply it, and they could do better in school. By the time they got to me in high school, they already said that they weren't good at science, they weren't good at math, they didn't know how they ended up in my chemistry class. But they were there, and they didn't want to leave. And so what did that look like? For us, it could be, we learned about like chemical reactions, for example, the difference between a physical and a chemical change. That's simple to teach. You know, you can tear a piece of paper and it's like, oh, what is this, physical or chemical? So what we did was we had an entire breakfast. We learned about the macromolecules. They were able to learn about the biochemical processes that take place. We were able to connect it back to biology, as well as what would constitute like a fat or lipid. What are your carbohydrates? Is this simple, is this complex? So they were able to now, something that they do every single day, now have the science behind it, if that makes sense. To the point where when we had the skillets out, they brought skillets from home, they had their pancake mix, everybody had a different station, they organized it. We had bacon, and one time we set off the alarm in the whole school. Everybody was outside because of bacon. And so I thought I was gonna get in trouble. I'm like, oh Lord, count your days, Natalie, don't mind the job. And the principal was actually very understanding. And so from that, he's like, okay, what did they learn? What did they learn? Yes, the smoke is going to rise from the bacon. And so we had everything as a learning experience. So while I was doing this in the informal space, a lot of it started when I was just in the formal classroom. I was teaching pre-ID biology, and my students, we were on ecology and evolution. And they said, we want to be able to take a field trip. We want to go to Disney World. I was like, okay, can you tell me how you can connect Disney World to these standards that I have to teach you? I gave those kids the standards. They went online, they did their research, they looked up like ecology and evolution, they split the park in different ways, they put together a proposal, a PowerPoint, brought the principal in, had orange juice and everything waiting for him to get permission, and they showed him how they were going to be able to learn biology through their field trip to Animal Kingdom. His question was, well, what if people don't have money? They said, well, we've taken care of it. Here's our fundraising strategy to be able to do it. That year, I had all but one student pass the end of course exam for biology. And the one who didn't, she was very, very close. And so that just goes to show that sometimes it's okay for some teachers to be able to take a back seat and for students to be able to take the lead. I used to get in trouble a lot as a teacher, but then when those scores started coming back in, they left me alone, right? And they were able to see that there was some sort of method behind the madness. I think we operate in fear a lot in terms of, like, we don't want to get in trouble, what ifs, you know, I get fired. But nothing, no progress happens if you don't take risks. And so I think just the willingness to be able to take a risk. I've been listening to Nate, which is what his name was here, and talking about an abolitionist teacher. Like, if you see that something is not right, do something about it. Find people who can help you to move an agenda forward. And I think the more that we put that into our teachers, where it's like, you can do something about this. You don't have to just be an object within the system. If that's the case, it will never make change. During the civil rights era, if they decided that, you know, how things were how they were gonna be, we would not be where we are right now. Progress only happens when people are willing to take risks and they think beyond themselves. Some people did lose their lives, but it was losing their lives for a larger cause. And so I think that that's how we have to approach even the work that we're doing within STEM education. I don't know if there are any questions online either. Is Coulter in here? I think I'll have to stop sharing or something. Any other questions?
I don't see anything coming in online.
Okay.